Go.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you hear this broadcast. It's in audio and video. And we put out a promo for Jeff Woolwine. And this is the Dave Emmons show, of course. And we put out a promo and we got some response from it. A lot of you guys out there, guys and gals, are interested in listening to what Jeff has to say. And I know they love uh, Arizona just like I do. I mean, wow, I can really get into Arizona. I really like Sedona, and a lot of things happen there for me. But it's a magical place, and I can see why Jeff Woolwine finds a lot of things going on. He's written several books. I think about 3 books. We're talking about petroglyphs, the Phoenix Lights, and also he's got a book. You saw the cover up of history of Phoenix, Arizona, Volume 1 book. And what he does, he covers the Phoenix Lights, petroglyphs in the sky, and that's the landscapes of the spirits. And then he gets into, these are all true stories, and they're legends also from the Indian nation there around that area. He'll explain that to you. He gets into a lot of petroglyphs that the Indians have drawn, and it's actually a kind of an artwork, and Jeff has caught on to it very well. I've had him on shows before a couple of times, and very interesting. And he's got a huge book. The first book we talked about a couple of years ago was huge, and this one here, Volume 1, I haven't seen the book, but I know basically what it covers, the synopsis of it, and what he's going to get into with his talking points. So he's actually a self-trained archaeologist. He's an author, and he's been researching for years. Most of his life, he's been intrigued, and he's investigated a lot of his local area. I won't give you his town or place where he lives. I never do that, but it's Arizona, and and he does research in Phoenix a lot. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, because once Jeff starts talking, you'll know he knows what he's talking about. He knows it right down to the nitty gritty. He's very detailed. So we're just going to turn him loose. And welcome aboard, Jeff Woolwine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for having me. Great to
Yeah.
be here.
And is there anything you want to mention that's going on right now with you? Are you involved in anything?
Oh,
You said something about a documentary.
let's see, documentary. You have to refresh my memory on that one.
Hey, I thought you were working on that with a crew or something, but maybe might have got you crossed up. But well, what's going on?
Okay.
You're still researching, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, you can never, stop learning about, what UFOs are, what the Phoenix Lights is, and things like that. So yeah, it's just great. I've been doing this for over 20 years now. I was born in Phoenix, and I've been seeing these UFOs ever since I was a kid. So once I started growing up, I'm starting to see, more and more of them in the sky. So it just made me go on a hunt, on a quest to find out exactly what is going on in my city, Phoenix.
Right.
And lo and behold, you know, once I found what was really going on, and I had proof evidence of this, I was just astonished, and I was really kind of blown away with it all, because it's not what everybody thinks.
Right. Yeah, right over my left shoulder, there's a shirt I hung up, and it says "I believe," and
Yeah.
it's got a flying saucer. My brother-in-law bought that for me for years ago, and I've been, always been an experiencer for all my life. So we talked about that. But this is your show, and I'm really interested in what you're finding out more. I know we talked about petroglyphs of the Indian tribes, but I know you got new stuff to tell us. So why don't you let us in on that?
Well, as he said, so the full book is out there now. You can find it on Amazon Kindle, and it goes into the real history of Phoenix, not what the archaeologist wants you to believe, but proven facts, evidence. Anywhere from colored photographs of explaining how things are going in the story that you're reading, to documents found in the downtown city downtown city library, that explains on what the real history is of Phoenix, told from the first park ranger, Charles Holbrook, of South Mountain in Phoenix, Arizona, from the early 1930s to the late 1940s. Now, in his journals, he talks about something completely different on what the archaeologist wants us to believe. It explains on who the Hohokam were, where they disappeared to, because we don't know what happened to these people. They were here for 1,000 years, and all of a sudden they just simply vanished. They disappeared, wiped out from the face of the earth with no trace of where they went. Now, the archaeologist wants us to believe that they simply migrated somewhere else because of drought. Well, if this was the case, then where did they go? Where did they go? There's no evidence on where these people went, except the only evidence that we can verify, if you will, is through the oral tradition of what the Native Americans say orally, passed down from generation upon generation, and also what the petroglyphs say about who these people were, what their everyday life was, and who they dealt with, and what happened to them.
Yeah, what about,
And,
is that closely associated, Jeff, with the Anastasi's disappearance?
oh, absolutely, yeah. This is fascinating stuff. So, it's like these people were here for 1,000 years, and they just simply vanished, and it all seemed to recognize or go inside with the same tribes from other places around the world where they were masters of their land for 1,000 years, and all of a sudden they disappeared. Well, it happened, in my opinion, in looking at the document.
Yeah, we just had a glitch. That's
Okay,
over Zoom.
okay, yeah. So I mean, it was it totally coincided with not only what happened to the Hohokam people, but also what happened to the other tribes around the world that were here, and then all of a sudden they disappeared.
Yeah, you're talking about the other archaeologists. Now you're a self-trained archaeologist, and you've had some training in it, but you went ahead and did your own thing. So you're opposing what a lot of these archaeologists are saying, what really happened with the history in Arizona, right?
Oh yeah, we have to look at what the evidence says.
Yeah.
We have to look at what the landscape says on the mountain. We have to look at what the petroglyphs are showing us, because these are prehistoric photographs. They didn't have video cameras or any way to record these things except on the places on where the events took place at. So, such as these mountains uh, that these events had taken place at, and so they're carving what had happened in the place where you see the carving at. So, if we, for instance, um, here's a perfect example. So, when we're looking at the petroglyphs, when we're examining the art, we have to look at the whole landscape because the artist is putting the landscape in with the art. For instance, so a lot of these petroglyphs, and I'm sure you've seen these before, doing your hiking trails and things. There's petroglyphs high up on a hill, right? We see a big petroglyph panel, and it's high up on a hill, and it's probably marking a spiral. We'll get into that here in a minute,
Mhm.
and something, let's say, a circle next to that spiral, okay? And so it's carved high up. Why is it carved high up? Because the artist is trying to tell you, look, I saw something and it was in the sky. And the only way to explain this to generations upon generations in my way is to carve it in the sky. So he finds a place where he saw this thing in the sky at. And so he climbs up there and he carves exactly what he saw in the sky. It's a, to us, it's a UFO sighting. It's an orb in the sky. And so he's telling us, I saw this in the sky because you have to look up to see it. Now, there's a lot of petroglyphs on South Mountain. For instance, there's a lot of pyramid hills out there, and these pyramids are sacred to the Hohokams. And so there's one, for instance, where this rock art panel and is in front of this pyramid. And you'll notice, I show this in the book. There's photographs of this in the book. You'll notice that there's what looks like a snake, okay? And he's doing a pyramid zigzag formation. It looks like a pyramid, okay? And there's something in the middle, in the valley of these two pyramids. And so when you step back from that panel and you look, it's right coincided with these two pyramids that this petroglyph is carving. So he's trying to tell us that he saw this object in between these two pyramids. This is one way to understand the rock art.
How large are these pyramids? I know there's been several people, Jeff, that has made comments about you coming on, and they said that they've lived in that area and they're very interested in what you got to say. How large are these pyramids?
You know, so there's, I mean, they're huge. I mean, they're big. Um, you know, pyramids. I do. There is a hill on excuse me, on the White Tank Mountains, just west of Phoenix. Now, this hill is very interesting. It looks like some of the covered up hills that we find in Mexico. This is how they found some of those pyramids. Is when the people left, they buried these pyramids. They buried them full of dirt. And there's a hill out there on the White Tank Mountains. It looks exactly like the stuff that we find in Mexico. And I'm sure that there's a pyramid there. I mean, after all, I mean, the Holocaust weren't the only people here. It was the Mayans also. And there's plenty of rock art to suggest this around the valley, that not only the Holocaust, but the Mayans were here from Mexico. And this only makes sense because, you know, this part of the Western world was a part of Mexico back in the time. So it just wasn't the Holocom Indians. It was, you know, the Mayans also that was here in the Valley of the Sun.
Now,
And
Holocom,
now,
that's a tribe that you don't hear much about. When did they start? Do you know when they really started their presence in that area, and when did they leave?
well, the archaeologists are telling us that they were here around at least about anywhere from 15 to 1700 years ago.
Okay.
And so, and they were masters of the land here. They were the first ones to make canal systems. As a matter of fact, our canal systems were using pretty much the same grid as the Holocoms did, just a little bit more advanced with concrete and a little bit deeper. But we're still using what the Holocoms are chiseled out in the ground back in the day. And so the story on this from the first park ranger of South Mountain. Now let's go into this guy real quick. So his name is Charles Holbrook, and he was the first park ranger from 1930s all the way up till the late 1940s. Now he just wasn't, I mean, a park ranger for Phoenix. I found this guy in documents all over the West Coast, from California, Utah, New Mexico. This guy was a famous guy, and he was a big guy in his field, so to speak. I mean, he was very well known. He was very popular, and so he just wasn't some Joe Blow off the streets being a custodian at South Mountain, being a park ranger. No, this guy, he had a lot of back pull to him. I mean, he was very popular and credible. He's very credible. And so in his journals that I discovered in the library, it talks about who the Hohokam people were. Now, his journals say that when the first Hohokam people lived here, they didn't know how to live here. Now, it wasn't a dried up landscape as it is today. It was a tropical like landscape. It wasn't all dry and desolate in a desert as we see it now today. And evidence of this is clearly can be seen through the weathering on the rocks and the waterfalls down the mountains. And so we can clearly see that this wasn't a dried up area, that this was at one point in time over 1,000 years ago, a lot, you know, tropical, more grass, more trees, more palm trees, whatever you want to call it. But it wasn't a desert, right? It wasn't a desolate desert. So, and in my opinion, how did it got here? In my opinion, because this is how I found the Phoenix lights, is they followed these lights to this area, to South Mountain. And South Mountain is a sacred mountain. Hopefully we have enough time to get into that. And so in my opinion, because I did the exact same thing, I followed these lights in the sky to the mountain. I believe how this is how the Holocoms arrived in this valley, is because they came to this mountain. Now they lived here for 1,000 years. You know, the masters of the canal systems, and the archaeologist wants us to believe that they never went to war with anybody, that they were peace-loving people, and you know, suggesting that I don't see any evidence that they did go to war except for something completely different, not man-made. But yeah,
They
but
did leave some of their technology behind, like you said, the canals and things. Do you think they were taught that technology from somebody up above? The lights?
well, see, here's the things. Here's the thing. So the archaeologist says that when the first people arrived here, they didn't know how to live. So the spirits of the earth and sky came up out of the sand world, came down from the heavens, and taught these people how to survive, how to live.
Mhm.
And in return, because there's evidence all over the rocks out there, in return, they worship these things as a type of god. So the same stuff that we're seeing in Mexico as the Mayans and the Quetzalcoatl and things like this, and the sacrificing going on, that was going on here in Phoenix also. There was so much evidence of altars oriented towards the east, and those of you who understand that understand what I'm talking about. It's oriented towards the east during the equinox and the solstice and things like that. And so, yeah, the same stuff that was going on in Mexico, the same stuff was going on here. And Charles Holbrook goes to write that all nations, all tribes from all nations used to come to this valley, used to come to the Valley of the Sun to South Mountain. And they named South Mountain at that time Mount Sapoa, Mountain of Mercy. Now, the story goes on to say that it was a handful of gold for a handful of corn. And they used to, I found evidence high up on hills where it's like a type of amphitheater where a group of people could sit and watch down below everything that was going on and also watch the sky because they were sky watchers also.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were watching these things, watching the Phoenix Lights, watching all these other creatures that were here. In return, they were teaching them how to, how to survive, things like this. And everything was going fine as long as the blood was being poured down blood being poured down the rock as a type of sacrifice. The sun would, continue to go in the sky and things like this. Everything was normal until one day, for reasons unknown, the sacrificing had stopped. And when that did, that's when things started to dry up in the valley. It was the water stopped flowing, things like this, and the people were asking their leaders, "Why did you stop the sacrifice? Look what's going on." I'm having an incident here. Can you hold on for just a second?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I've talked to Jeff before. My audience out there that's interested in all this, he's busy right now. I guess he had a knock on the door, but I've talked to a lot of people and they say that they really like Jeff. And I've had him on my shows a couple of times and he's a great guy and he knows quite a bit about the Native American Indian culture in that area. And also he talks about the Hopi and Anasazi. We get into the Incas in the Central America and Mexico. And a lot of those tribes also disappeared, as he was saying.
My apologies. Hopefully, you can edit that out. But
No, that's
okay.
okay.
So
I was kind of talking, explaining what you studied with all these Indian tribes and things, and some of the disappearances in Central America and South America and Peru. A lot of tribes have disappeared and they just up and gone. But this 1,500 years ago, when they had trees and they had a little bit more water than they do now, that wasn't part of the ice age. That wasn't old enough to be part of the ice age or any of the glaciers or anything. So what changed? Was there a weather change that did this?
Well, what happened to their disappearance? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, but also I'm asking you why it changed weather-wise, why they lost a lot of their crops and vegetation and
Well, I
of
mean, the oral tradition says, like what we're talking about now. Of course, there's a scientific, where the scientific says the scientific authorities or whatever to say that because of the climate change and things like that, what's going on now.
Right.
But the oral tradition tells us, and the rock art tells us that when the sacrificing had stopped, the people was screaming at their leaders, "Why did you stop the sacrifice? Look what happened. The water stopped flowing. Everything is drying up. Why did you do this?" And so the oral tradition says that one day they looked up towards the east, and the devil came from the east and took these people away. Now, this coincides with what the petroglyphs are talking about. So this is talking about these creatures coming down and taking people up into the sky. Okay, this is what the petroglyphs are showing. And when you look at my website and you look at my book, you can see photographs of this. And so, and Charles Holbrook, right? Why would Charles Holbrook write all this, right? Why would he write this? He's saying, because he learned this from the Native Americans who was with him at the time. Okay, they told him what's going on, and this is what they told him. This is what he wrote, and he's saying that when all this was happening, there were some that were afraid and they hid in caves, right? And they watched what was going on. They watched their people being taken away by the Phoenix lights, okay, by these things in the sky, and they were afraid. They were terrified. And when it was all over, they screamed to their leaders, "Look what happened! Look what you did! Look!" And the leaders, they went to the sacrificing table and they cut out their own hearts on the sacrificing table. And the people vowed never to live in this valley again. They cursed this land because they knew if they were going to continue to live in this valley of the sun, that eventually they would have to go back to war with these spirits, with these phoenix lights of the earth and the sky. So they packed up all their stuff. Now, Charles Holbrook writes, he says that they buried the gold. They buried gold in South Mountain. And he says the gold was as tall as the
Yeah, we
and
had
they put all this gold in these tombs. Now, in my explanation or my hiking South Mountain for for over 20 years now, I've found a lot of tombs. Okay, a lot of things that are suspicious to me, that resembles something that is buried there, especially in these either man-made pyramid hills or natural hills. There's something in this. I explain this in the book. And so they buried all this gold in the mountains, and they vowed never to come here again. And so they went back to their homeland, Mexico. And so for hundreds of years, nobody lived in this Valley of the Sun.
wow.
And so there was tribes on the outskirts, and they saw the phoenix lights. They saw these things in the sky, and they were afraid because they knew what had happened to the people, to their ancestors. So they wasn't going to do anything with this. As a matter of fact, this type of information is very taboo. This information is not talked about. Okay, this is the reason why we don't know about this, is because it's been covered up for at least 80 years now. So and Charles Holbrook, he told people this. He actually had a little flyer, and you can find this flyer in my book and on my website, and that he passes out to people. And the flyer, the booklet that talks about what happened to the Hohokam people, who talks about who these people were. His headline says the lost city of Cibola, the lost city of gold. Now, the archaeologist doesn't even want to admit that the Spanish conquistadors was even in the Valley of the Sun. But Charles Holbrook proved this, that they were. There's a petroglyph carving out there of one of the Spanish kings that was there. There's so much evidence that the Spanish was here. In my book, you can find evidence that we discovered out there on South Mountain from the Spanish.
I've heard several documentaries talk about the Spanish being up in that valley and being up in New Mexico and all around Utah. Now you had a real, I guess, description of what those Phoenix lights really were. You said they were coming down and picking up these people. What did those entities look like? Did they ever draw them as a petroglyph? And what was that? What was the Phoenix lights?
Oh, absolutely. For for so many years, we've been talking about spaceships and crafts and things like this. And so going into this, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking I'm going down this path, I'm going down this journey. Right. I started in 2004. And I'm seeing the Phoenix lights, I'm recording them, and they're showing me where to go. I basically followed them to South Mountain. And in 2004 and 2005, after I did a numerous news reports in Phoenix, and in 2004 talking about the sightings that I'm filming, they all said that it was flares. Well, my investigations and all the studies I've been doing, these things like mountains, right? Mountains seem to be the key. So in 2005, I moved to South Mountain. I moved to South Mountain on the east side, about a mile away, high up, uh, high enough above the trees and everything where I could see the mountain. I sat there for 3 years. And so then I started seeing these day things, right? And so we're still thinking technology, we're still thinking spaceships and green men and gray guys from another planet and stuff, and that's what I'm thinking too. And so I see in 2005, I see this object come out of the sky and seem to go and land on the on South Mountain. And so I filmed it. I saw it. I filmed it. So the next day I explored. I go out there to find out exactly where this thing went down at. And I'm expecting to see a crop circle or some kind of evidence that a spaceship landed there. What do I find? I find a rock with spirals on it and an orb right above this spiral, the exact same thing that I filmed the day before. And so it just blew my mind. Wait a minute. Okay. That's just, I mean, that was crazy. Now, before I started doing this, I remember seeing a Native American who worked at one of the Indian museums down here. A very credible guy. He's a shaman, and I remember seeing him on a public access channel here in Phoenix. And he's up on South Mountain, and he's talking about the petroglyphs. And one of the people that he was with, turned around and says, "Hey, that stick-figure man looks like he's looking up at something above his head." And Dave, that was his name, Dave turned around and says, yes, that is part of some of the interpretations out here, is that our ancestors saw and recorded things in the sky. And so this is 2004 when I first saw this, and the supposed 1997 Phoenix lights happened in 97, and yet nobody was putting this together. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. So we have strange lights in the sky now, and now we have strange markings on the rocks. I said there has to be a connection. So in 2005, after I had discovered the petroglyph and the spiral and the orb out there that I filmed the day before, I remember seeing Dave on TV. So I got a hold of him, I called him up, didn't tell him who I was, didn't tell him what I was doing. Because and I kept all that to myself. I told him that I'm interested in petroglyphs. I saw him explaining what the petroglyphs are, and I would like to film you. Can we go up on the mountain and can I film you talking about explaining to me the true meanings of the petroglyphs? So we spent about 3 hours out there, and he was going into some crazy stuff. Okay, and a lot of it was going over my head at the time. And especially when it came down to spirals. Now he says spirals are a symbol for an emergence point, for a vortex, if you will. It's like you're looking down into a hole. Now he says that when that spiral ends in a crack of the boulder, the crack of the stone, he says that crack is the emergence point, is the place where the spirits are going down into the underworld. He says when the spiral ends up, he says there's a vortex in the sky. He's like, there's a door, and that's exactly what he said. He says there's a vortex in the sky. And so I'm thinking, oh wow, at the time I'm like, well, how can a big spaceship technology craft get into a crack that size of the mountain, of the boulder there, until days later when I actually saw what he was talking about. This object came out of the sky and absorbed itself into the stone. It went down into the mountain. And I'm like, oh my goodness, holy cow, this isn't a myth here. This isn't some folklore. This isn't just some interpretation. This is correct what's going on. These things are going in South Mountain. Now, after a while, I mean, these things knew I was there. Like I said before, they showed me where to go. These things were in front of me. I followed them to South Mountain. They knew I was coming. I can't explain anything else. I don't go on coincidences. I believe everything happens for a reason.
Right.
And these things showed me where to go. And I sat there for like 3.5 years by South Mountain with my video camera, and I watched that mountain for many, many years. And the more and more I watched it, the more and more, and they were coming right up to me. Those of you that has been following me ever since 2005 know that these things are leaving South Mountain and coming right over me and going right past my windowsill. You can see that in my videos. And when
What
they were
shape
doing
were those?
this,
What shape were those craft, Jeff?
well, I'm getting I'm getting
Okay.
into that, and I soon realized that, I mean, because especially one. So, well, I learned that some of these petroglyphs has the power to invoke the spirits, and I accidentally did that one time. I was sitting in front of a petroglyph high up on a hill next to a canyon, and there's tons of spirals on that canyon, meaning that canyon is a doorway. That whole canyon down the side of South Mountain is a doorway. And there were some petroglyphs there. So I'm like, hey, you guys are cool. Why don't you come and see me? Well, like 2 days later, okay, and on top of this canyon was a carving of two men looking up at a flying snake.
Flying snake.
So a
Yeah.
flying snake, right? A flying dragon, Quetzalcoatl, if you will. 2 days later, give or take 3 days later, not very long. It's in the morning, just at daybreak, and I'm watching South Mountain, and lo and behold, that canyon where I was there a few days ago, this red and black serpent came out of South Mountain and ascended in the sky.
Hmm.
He came out of South Mountain and went in the sky about 1,000 feet. Then he changed directions and came right over me. I filmed this. This aired on one of the news stations in Phoenix, News Channel 3. This sighting was on News Channel 3 in Phoenix. And it came right over me, and it's moving. It's changing shape. Sometimes it looked like a cross. Sometimes it looked like a serpent. I mean, it was red and black, and it was right there. And I'm filming it, and I'm thinking to myself, this is not spaceships here. These are not crafts. What we're dealing with out here. These things are alive, right? These things are living beings.
Yeah.
I mean, and the more and more I started to learn about the petroglyphs, I soon realized that what we're dealing with is not crafts at all. They're not spaceships from another world. That these things are living entities, living beings. I mean, I have so many videos of the Phoenix Lights. I'm probably the only one that has at least maybe 350 videos of the Phoenix Lights, and now the day sightings, and oh my god, I mean, I was capturing some crazy stuff.
Yeah, you had a
And
DVD in 2007. Is that
right,
I looked it up, and it's not for sale anymore. Is it still out there?
I'm not sure. I did a few documentaries with some people. I'm not sure what's still available out there, but my book is. My book is still photographs of taking still video clips of the sightings that I
Jeff,
had.
when you're talking about these entities, these actually the biological looking entities that disappear into the rocks, and also the spaceships that disappear, I go harken back to they can dematerialize, or they can raise their frequencies and go through anything, just like the ETs go through walls and they're invisible in your house. That associates even with the smaller part of it, the micro part of it. And you're talking about a macro where a huge ship or a huge animal or a serpent goes into a rock. Same
Right, right, and I mean, I haven't found any evidence of the petroglyphs out there of any crafts. All right, I've been all over South Mountain. I've been all over the mountains of Phoenix, and not one depiction of a flying saucer, little green man with big eyes, none of that. Okay, but what I did find is living creatures, living entities, and this is what the Native Americans are telling us all these years, is that these things are shapeshifters. They're living beings. They're spirits, right? And I understand why they call them spirits, because when they're coming out of the mountain, they're like a ghost. You can see through them. As they climb higher in the sky, they become more solid. Same thing when they're coming down on the mountain. They're solid, they're changing shape, they're silent, they don't cast any shadows. You wouldn't even know that they're there unless you pay attention. And they come down, and then all of a sudden you can start to see through them, and then they just absorb themselves into the stone.
Yeah, if you want to make a Native American Indian nervous, all you have to do is start talking about shape shifting, right?
Oh my goodness. So yeah, that's a perfect point because after I was done with Dave, and we're up there talking about the petroglyphs and things like this, he was all open. He was telling me of all this information about the glyphs and about the Native Americans, about the spirits of the earth and the sky. He was all open to that until we got down off the mountain in the parking lot. And I was like, "Are you familiar with the Phoenix Lights?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, there was somebody on the news a few months ago talking about it." And I said, "Yes, that was me." He goes, "That was you?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, I'm working on this theory that the Phoenix Lights has something to do with the rock art out here on the mountains." Boy, when I said that, everything got shut down. He stopped talking to me. He won't go on the mountain with me anymore.
Really?
He won't contact my phone calls no more. That was it. That was completely it. Now, why? Why is that? Because the real indigenous people, the real Native Americans who understand this, who was taught by their ancestors. The true history of these things is what did we talk about in the beginning? That these things took these people away.
Hmm.
That it wasn't a good thing. That these Phoenix Lights, that these things that we see in the sky, was what was the cause, was the leading cause of the Hohokam disappearance. Now, the Hohokam name is a Pima name, a Pima word, because the Pima tribe considered themselves ancestors to the Hohokam. Not only them, but also the Tohono O'odham tribe. Now, Hohokam is a Pima name for the people who got taken away, the people who are gone, the people who are missing, right? The
Hmm.
people who got taken away. And so they know what these things, you're right, it's taboo. Now, I've been talking to a lot of shamans, a lot of leaders, tribal leaders, and things like this. Now, some of them are trying to mislead me, but a lot of them, some of them don't want to talk to me, but the ones who do, they don't want to go on camera.